My name is Abraham Onyeriode Oghobase. The name is from the Robo tribe in Nigeria, from Delta State. I was born in 1979 at a time where Nigeria had, it's like an oil boom. So I was born around the time where there was just so much money. But of course, I also grew up in a time where we're also faced with military regime, in and out between around 80s up to 90s before we became democracy. I grew up in this sort of like environment where it wasn't so much about art, it was really about being proper, going to school, having to do engineering, accounting. Not a lot of museums or art institutions for kids to visit. I think we make do with playing in the church. But as I grew older, I realized that I love music, I love art. And I think this is super important. There's a reason why I say this because I strongly believe that art is a calling. It calls you. It's not something you decide to just want to go do. It's not enough to know how to draw or to know how to paint or to know how to sing. I think it's much more. There's something supernatural that drives it. So my practice is basically about post-colonialism. I also explore identity somewhat, representation, using abstraction as a way to engage critical discourse and just really interested in language and the philosophy of aesthetic. Has emerged as a result of just being aware of just racial prejudice around me after because I was based in Nigeria, but as I grew older, I started traveling, and for the first time, I could tell the difference. Like, okay, my blackness was a thing. As soon as I left the shores, and then it became a thing, I was like, oh, it was very weird. I was confused, and I didn't know what to make of it and how to make sense of it because it's like, but I'm not part of this though. It's like it's like. And then you realize that it goes way deep, it goes way deeper. It made me really question a lot of things, my work, my practice, like what is this, what is, and then photography became really boring at some point. I think, and that was how, because I had too many questions and I had a lot of anxiety as well, and I was just trying to make sense of it. And I just thought photography wasn't enough. It was too dimensional, it was too flat. And I was like, how do I reproduce an idea, a feeling? And I say this a lot, but I'm very captivated by music and music, specifically ambient music. One of my favorite albums is Music for Airport by Brian Eno. It was for my trip in 2006, my very first trip to Europe, that the curator played that album to me and gave me the CDs. Because I remember the first time I heard it, I cried. Something could move someone so much that you feel something, and it wasn't loud. It was tender, but also it was tough in a way. So as I dug deeper, I began to discover people like Philip Glass, and the rest of them, Steve Reich, the rest of them as well. And for me, it's interesting also the idea around repetition and how repetition could also, as quiet as repetition is, and how there's also something can emerge from it. I became more interested in just this idea of nothingness and quietness and stripping away this idea of what photography is to me, thinking about the medium itself as a medium that could be elastic. And I think performance gave me a leeway, a bit in the beginning, because I used to do a lot of performance type compositions within the structure of my work. I started looking for other ways to sort of like develop these ideas. And then I realized that I could actually use repetition as a strategy, but also I could also use collage in a way that can give depth to my idea. And I think the reason why my work shifted so much was the fact that because I was so connected to ambient music and the feeling that I got from it, I wanted to start making work that felt like that. So in a way, I see myself as a composer. And I think that is what has informed the way that I think about structures, forms, history, representation, identity, where there's a absolute freedom to engage in form and to reproduce and create a feeling. A typical example is when I started doing Xerox, like photocopies, when I would repeat it. It was just by chance that I ran out of ink and it just there was just these streaks that just went across an image. And I remember the feeling. I was like, damn, I think I'm just hitting it. I'm just hitting jackpot right now. Like I could just feel it. Like you just know that something that just happened. Like it was a paradigm shift, And that excitement of laughing out loud in the studio and just like hitting the table or something. And it's like, you just know. And it's just moment that just makes you feel like it's worth it. Like you're just in the studio and you're just like, okay, because the way I'm thinking sonically, I'm thinking as a composer, and it's not something somebody else can do, even if it feels very quiet or simple. It's just trying to make connections, constantly trying to make connections and see, even when things are not supposed to go together, but trying to find some type of link, to create a feeling. And sometimes it's not just to create all these connections because you want the work to be literal so that you know that this is what I'm talking about. Sometimes I go the complete opposite direction where it could just be something I'm supposed to talk about, maybe violence on the land, for example, but then it could be a photograph of a landscape and just a distorted images of birds layered on top of the landscape again, for example. So it's just sort of like, because I'm more interested in the weight of emotion and the belly, and it's something that I feel like is the reason why I make work. I don't want to be trapped in this idea of the literalness of just making something or making something about colonialism, for example, because I feel like it's very much more than that. It goes way deeper into spaces where I even feel like I can't even say much about it, just something one has to experience, right? But the basis, of course, is there. But I always like not to reduce the work to that because it's much more than just representation or colonial history or something that has to do with extraction, exploitation, the body or land. There's a lot of possibilities that emerges as well when you begin to see how you can actually move things and how you can almost like sample things as well. It's almost like you're DJing or you're creating some type of like music, like hip hop. And it's just fascinating because what it does is that it creates depth, but also a certain type of abstraction emerges as well that create other layers of meaning for the work in itself. So it's just things for me also like the works they overlap. The landscape are very connected to one another. So on the one hand, I photograph being under the hill, photograph those people. Then when I saw the weather was just beautiful, I just climbed up the hill. Didn't even know, but I just saw that bus, this vast, massive land, quiet land. And then you see the dust. It was such a beautiful moment. It's one of those moments in photography where it's like magic. Like I just knew I was photographing something really special. I just knew. And it's one of my favorite images. It was just a gift. That moment was a gift. And I always just feel very thankful, Feel always feel thankful to God, for just blessing me with that moment, that's magic that happened. It's a journey and it's something that I always want people to understand that art making is not one size fit all. It's not everybody's journey is just completely different. Disruption for me, it's important in looking at systems and structures and finding different ways in which I can reimagine it because that's actually where the ultimate agency is. It's to destroy because it's not to dismantle is almost like to destroy something. You're not destroying it, but it's to disrupt it. It's like if there's like an earthquake, like you feel it, you can feel it. You're scared. All of a sudden you're aware. It's like, oh my God, I could lose my life or something. And so that's almost like what I try to do, where it's almost like the dismantling of these ideas and structures could perhaps maybe bring some level of attention, like, oh, this thing, or, yeah, okay, I get it. It's like, oh, I think it's important to have a dialogue. It's important to be open to learn from those institutions, right? And to engage critically with those institutions and to, in a way, gracefully question the systems aesthetically in your work. But access is very important in dealing with these institutions. When you gain access, I think it's important to realize that that's already a major step, right, to a critical discourse is something that I value. I feel like sometimes we have to come with a sense of grace and not with a sense of entitlement. We have to come with a sense of empathy to be able to engage those objects or engage archives in ways that doesn't vilify but engages a global discourse that has to do with racism or systemic racism or institutional racism. You really have to find your own road. And it's a beautiful road. It's very unique. It's you. It can only be you. You must create from your experiences. The aesthetic emerges from your curiosity. It also emerges from your vulnerability and the accidents that happen along the way. And being aware that those accidents also are very important because they can also serve your interest as well. They can become very much part of your filmmaking process. So to be aware of things that you feel like you want to discard, to be very careful to throw things away, to be very careful to not feel like everything must be thrown away, but to be careful to be aware of your surrounding. When I say surrounding, it's like everything that has to do with your life and your work. Just know that there's a connection also between you as a person and the world because you're not different. You're very connected. It's all connected. Everything is connected to your body, to your life, to your vulnerability, to your experiences. Everything is very much, intertwined, and you must try to make sense of it through materials, through accident, chance encounter, and it's a beautiful journey. What is next for me now is I'm gonna be exhibiting at the Toronto Biennale at Biennale. So I'm working on a commission for the Toronto Art Biennale, and that's what I'm really busy on right now, and I'm looking forward to that. And that's an installation I think you should come and see.